So good morning. Today we're actually not going to learn Tanya, but we're going to Fabrain because it's a very special day in the Chabad calendar. It's the Yahrtzeit, the 35th Yahrtzeit of the Rebbetzin, Chaya Mushka, a daughter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and his wife, and a granddaughter of the Rebbe Rashab. So I want to share with you a little bit about her, and to begin by telling you that she was not someone who was seen much at all in the public. The first time that I saw this Rebbetzin, this woman, was in 1980. I remember it like now. I was standing on Eastern Parkway in either the service lane or the whatever. They had the Lag B'Omer parade, and they shut down that street for several hours. And someone pointed out to me, look up there. And it was the house next door, which today is the library. The library is there. And, the library offices and an extension of the library is there because there's the library under 770 in the basement. And I saw someone standing at the window. I was far away. I didn't get a clear picture. That was the only time that I saw the Rebbetzin live, alive. In the 50s and 60s, she would come, or 70s and 70s, she would come to her sister, Hannah Garari, who lived on the third floor of 770, and from time to time, and they would see her come in and out, but also not much. One of the reasons that she was so private, I believe, it's by nature, didn't want to make a scene of herself. And I'm talking about Chevra, you know what means private? You didn't see her never at a Farbrengen, and you never saw her at davening in 770. I mean, you never saw her. I mean, let's make a comparison. Let's take the Fega, the Satmar Rav, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum's wife, Fega, right? Not only was she active, when the Satmar Rebbe passed away, there were Chassidim who considered her like the Rebbe, the extension. And during his lifetime, she was very, very active, and many people came to the house and to see the Satmar Rav, and they greeted her too. You know what I'm saying? Much more involved. Even in Chabad history, take for example the Rebbe Rashab's wife, Rebbetzin Sarah Schneerson. She was very active in committees, in chesed funds, in having funds for the yeshiva bacharim and toim mimim who didn't have much, and she provided food and clothing. But this Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka was really obtrusive, not seen, not heard from. So only after her passing did things come out. Like someone said Shabbos in shul to another Lubavitcher. He said, I didn't even know there was a Rebbetzin until 1988 after she passed away, and the Rebbe started to speak about her every single Shabbos. Not about her, but about lessons we take from the Parsha and her to do more Torah mitzvahs. And the Rebbe quoted the pasuk, "V'cha yitein leliboy," and the living will make the heart attentive. Now this phenomena has not yet been studied, not that I know of, and I'm sure one day there's going to be an academic PhD, a dissertation written on her and her style and how she fits into the annals of Chabad. I'm convinced. It has to be. But as far as I know, it's not been done yet. And there's definitely what to write about. But what type of person was she from what we heard later? I want to begin with the Rebbe's comment that he made to us. At that time, he was called Assemblyman Dov Heikind. He lives here in Borough Park, Flatbush. He was an state assemblyman for many, many years. He's the one that you see sometimes on the news. He's very outspoken against anti-Semitism. His parents being, I think, Holocaust survivors. Being Holocaust survivors, he's very outspoken. And he did a lot for our communities for many years. So Dov went by one of the days during Shiva for the Rebbetzin. Everyone had a chance to go by the Rebbe. The Rebbe gave $1, and sometimes someone would say something like, to comfort the Rebbe. So Dov Heikind went by, and he said a few words to the Rebbe, comforting him. And the Rebbe said to him, and I don't remember the verbatim quote, but close to it, people underestimate her closeness. Isser, could you please please mute yourself. Anyway, Isser. Oh my gosh. We have a medical consultation. Dr. Velvel, would you like to give your opinion on this too? Anyway, so you hear that? Listen to this comment. The Rebbe said, yes, she was really underestimated. And when I heard this, it really, really opened I started to think, wow. I mean, that's like saying people didn't appreciate my wife.
She was very agitated.
So what does that mean? What does that mean? The Rebbe didn't say more. I'm going to share with you what I think, okay? So take it or leave it. Because she was so quiet and behind the scenes and not known, the Jewish world, the Hasidic world, the Litvish world, the world of Orthodoxy, didn't consider her to be a kind of a real Rebbe's wife, a Rebbetzin of a Rebbe. 1 second, Moshe. If you're a real Rebbetzin, get involved. But when you're not involved, they look down at you. They look down at her. So that's why the Rebbe said they underestimated who she was. Let me finish and then I'll take your question, Moshe. So the question is, what did she do that was worth notoriety, was worth, to be in the annals of Chabad? Well, number one, she's the Rebbe's wife. That's the most important thing. A tzaddik, a Rebbe, a tzaddik, his wife is special. I'm not going to say, I'm not a prophet. I don't know what level. That's not the point. That's number one. Number two, she was a daughter of the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe had 3 daughters. She was the middle daughter. Chana was the oldest. Mushka, her name was Chaya Mushka. Mushka was the middle. And they had a sister, Shana, who Nebuch was killed in Treblinka in 1942. Married to Mendel Horenstein, a relative of theirs from the Rebbe Marash. Anyway, that's number 2. So her being the wife of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, being the daughter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and in her own right, she was someone who kept a low profile for the following. And Adin Steinsaltz, Rabbi Steinsaltz, I think, says this as well. So, there's what to think about. After 1950, right, we celebrated the previous Rebbe's Yahrtzeit, the Shevat, a few weeks ago. After Shevat, there were 2 son-in-laws left. Right, the 2 son-in-laws. The older one was Rabbi Shmaryo Garari, married to Chana, the daughter, and the younger one was the Rebbe, married to Rebbe Chaya Mushka. Now, naturally, the older one should become Rebbe, and we've discussed this a lot, and there's a lot more to discuss, and I really urge you. I wrote an entire book on this called Rashag and Rebbe. Rashag stands for Rabbi Shmaryo Garari. I have it over there. Anyway, so because initially there was some controversy, a year or 2, she didn't want to upset her older sister the entire time. And what she did is she kept a low profile. In other words, let's take, for example, Avi, if she would come to 770 for Rosh Hashanah, right? The women would clear the place for her, give her a place up front, surround her with bodyguards. She hated that. She didn't want that. And she knew that her sister sitting upstairs on the 3rd floor of the same building is being eaten up inside. She's the older sister who considers herself, an important figure in the Shalshelis, in the dynasty of Chabad, and she's upstairs by herself at a table, and her sister is given the red carpet. And this would have been every time and everywhere. You know how Hasidic Judaism became, to the chagrin of some, and I'm not taking a position, that it became kind of, a pictorial for New York Times magazine, so that when a Rebbe goes, you have to have bodyguards and fancy cars and an entourage. Well, do you know that when the Rebbe Rashab would go in the morning to the mikveh, he told Rabbi Yankel Landau of Bnei Brak, the former Rav of Bnei Brak, Rabbi Landau's Hechsher, he told him, I don't want you coming, because he was a Rav and a Talmud Chochem, and he, for a while, he was like a shamish to the Rebbe. So he said, you stay here in Shul, I can go myself. And I heard this, by the way, I'm telling you now, from Rabbi Gafni of Tzfas, formerly of Bnei Brak, who had the yeshiva in Kfar Chabad, today he's in Tzfas, so Zayin Gesund is an older man already. He told me this because he spoke to Rabbi Landau. Rabbi Landau told him that the Rebbe, that he had to do all kinds of tricks to be able to go along behind the Rebbe, to walk with the Rebbe as he walks to the mikveh. And he would make his beard or walk back from the mikveh. So he would make his beard wet, implying that he's also was in the mikveh, so that he's walking back from the mikveh. He's not there because he's just accompanying the Rebbe. I mean, such tricks, So what do we see? That in Lubavitch, for sure, this whole idea of entourages and pictures and bodyguards was disgusting. And I'm using that word, disgusting. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, several times, this is after the Sfarim returned. You remember on Hey Tavis, there was the announcement that the library that was taken belongs to Chabad. Judge Sifton ruled that way, right? But then it took a while for them to get back to 770. Well, this is online, by the way. You'll see. So the truck comes and it drops off, and Rabbi Sheptov, Rabbi Krinsky, Rabbi Chadaka, Rabbi Groner, everyone's bringing out boxes into the library. Then, at some point, the Rebbe was going to go to, I think, the Ohel, and a bunch of people were standing outside, including Bacharim, and he started to give it to them. He says, what are you doing here? This is the way he celebrates Sfarim? It's online. You can't hear all the words, but and everyone ran away like mice. They ran. The Rebbe hated this idea of, I'm going to the oil now. So yes, people lined up, and he gave them tzedakah, and there were times they needed brachas.
It's called celeb watching.
Celeb watching, yeah, I don't want to say that, chas v'sholem, to say it about a tzaddik, a Rebbe, a tzaddik. So, today, it's the in thing. I just this Shabbos, someone was telling me how, I don't want to say who, because he's a Rebbe. Today he's considered a Rebbe, but he did photo. He went to see certain Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael to have photo shoots. I mean, that was the perception of certain Chassidim. I wasn't there. The point is that this was never in Chabad something that we made that was important, and in fact was discussed. We discussed it. It was discussed. Anyway, the point is, she knew that her sister would be very upset, so she kept a low profile. So that's a very important nekuda to understand this person. But again, primarily, it was because by nature, she wasn't that type of person. So yes, the Rebbetzin Fege of Satmar, Rabbi Yoel's wife, was a more outgoing person and enjoyed that publicity, and the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka was not. Now, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka had some very good friends in Crown Heights. What do I mean? She really enjoyed speaking Velvel Russian. If she had a woman or someone who came to see her who spoke Russian, she loved talking Russian. They say that in her house she had Russian newspapers. And please, whoever is not on mute yourself, please. She had Russian newspapers and French newspapers because they lived in France for 7 years, so she knew French. In general, when she shopped for dishes and clothing, it was of the best quality. So the word that I used for her years ago is that she was an elegant lady, an elegant woman, a classy woman. She was not the type of Rebbetzin that when you looked at her, you saw antiquated Judaism from 2,000 years ago in a cave in Haifa. She was an individual who dressed well. She had the finest china. Her house was spotless, superb, organized, and when a guest came, both a man or a woman, to say hello to her, she greeted them with the greatest honor. Another thing, children, those children of people she knew who would bring their children to her for a bracha, she gave them always treats. She treated them like children. In other words, on one hand, they're coming to a Rebbetzin, you know. She tried making them feel very comfy, you know. In other words, this whole thing, I'm going to visit a Rebbetzin, how am I going to dress, and how am I going to look, and what am I going to say? She tried to break that down so you shouldn't feel that way, especially children. She took a great interest in the pride of Lubavitch. And these two things I'm going to tell you now are probably the two most important things as far as what she did as a Rebbetzin, as the Rebbe's wife, for the world of Lubavitch, the world of Chabad. Number one, during that year, 50 to 51, after her father passed away, right? And I mentioned to you there was a controversy who should be the Rebbe. And our Rebbe, he didn't want to be a Rebbe. I'm telling you, he was so happy doing his work for the Merkez and Kahos and the Nigunim, Chabad organizations, and learning and davening and being a private person. Then the pressure comes and says, hey, your father-in-law passed away, the elder Hasidim, and they say, we need and we want you because we know you're a great Talmud Chacham and you're very friendly with the Bacharim that were in 770 in the 40s. As Reb Shlomo Karlbach would tell over and others, right? So the Rebbe was the go-to man, you know, the more friendly person. And he didn't want it. So they say, I don't have this in writing, but they say that it was his wife, this Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, that we celebrate her Yahrtzeit today. His wife said to him, to the Rebbe, said, if you don't take over the leadership of Lubavitch, of Chabad, my father's, maybe my grandfather's years of the hard work and the Mesiras Nefesh in Russia will go to waste. It will all dissipate. It'll all fall apart. And you have to understand that comment of 1950 was very, very appropriate and real. Because 1950 is not 1994 when our Rebbe passed away. 1994, we're in the middle of a dot-com era. Affluence is at its peak. The Judaism and Orthodoxy is highly on the rise. The Baal Tshuva movement is flourishing, right? So then you can argue, Lubavitch, even without the Rebbe physically being alive, and other organizations, but in this case Chabad, Hey, yeah, Chaim Potek thought there's going to be a mass exodus and people are going to end up in a psychiatric ward and you can put a lock on Lubavitch. I interviewed Chaim Potek in Marion Station, Pennsylvania in 1994, I think, 495. It's in my book, Conversations with the Rebbe. So, and he told that to Ted Koppel on Nightline. And you can see it. And it didn't happen. On the contrary, last night was the Kinas HaShluchos. My daughter from Eretz Yisrael is here with my granddaughter. 5,000 women, K'nai Nahara. 5,000 women in a room, in a banquet. And the stories you hear, it's online today. You can hear it online. Not just from the Shluchos that have, very successful Chabad houses, but the little tiny ones here and there. The speaker last night was a journalist. What was her name? Raviv? Sivan. You got to hear what she said. She made a very good point after lauding the great accomplishments of the Chabadas that are very successful, very known. She said, "I'm here to celebrate those that are not known." And she said, when you make an event for 50 people and only 7 come, I laud that. That's gewaldig. And she gave many examples of what seems to be infantile, secondary, not important, and failure, and what seems at times as failure. She says, no, it's not. It's great. You got to listen to what she said. So anyway, in 1994, and now it's almost 30 years later, you have this explosion, this booming, this success. But in 1950, people didn't have socks, like my father, running around in the Mabarot near Netanya. Didn't wear socks because he couldn't afford it, right? People are in transit camps. The refugees from Yemen, from Europe. It was a balagan. Yiddishkeit, no one knew. Where's Yiddishkeit going to end up, right? So now you can appreciate, what the Rebbetzin said to the Rebbe, if you don't take over the leadership of Lubavitch, of Chabad, goodbye. It's not going to be what happened today. Put a lock on the door, on the shop. So that's one very, very vision. Look at the vision of the woman, this lady, the vision that she had. And they say that was the camel that broke, that was the camel's back, the straw that broke the camel's back, that the Rebbe did accept the leadership. That's one important Yesod, foundational idea that she did for us in Lubavitch. Number 2 was during the Svarim case, which was a heart-wrenching, a difficult time. The most difficult time that we saw the Rebbe was during those days, those months, that year. For a month straight, he went to the oil every day, and when the Rebbe went to the oil, he didn't eat. He just drank something. He wouldn't eat till at night when he came back. And it took a toll on his health. And she was deposed. Rabbi Krinsky, was very concerned, and he wanted to try to stop it. And the Rebbe said, she'll do just fine. She'll do just fine. And the deposition is also online, or was online. I've seen it several times. Parts of it, at least, for sure. Anyway, there's one line there that is outstanding, where Nate Lewin, our lawyer, is deposing and asking questions, and there's the opposing attorneys, and everyone's listening. So he says, Mr. Schneerson, or Rebbetzin Schneerson, how he addresses it, I don't remember, and he says, did the books belong to your father or to Chabad? It's almost a verbatim quote, okay? And she says, they belong to Chabad because my father belonged to the Hasidim. brilliant answer. A real brilliant answer. And that answer was used by Judge Sifton in his decision, as part of his decision. That here, the daughter, who would have been one of two inheritors of the library, she says, no, it's not my private library, because my father wasn't private, because my father was a Rebbe. My father was a tzaddik. She didn't say these words. I'm extrapolating and opening it up for you. And therefore, his entire being as a Rebbe and a tzaddik of Lubavitch belongs to Hasidim. You don't have any Hasidim. You're not a Rebbe. We have plenty of wannabes here in Borough Park in Williamsburg who open shop and have no Hasidim. You know? And they come, they hire them, they raise money to bring people in, they give them chont and kishka, and then they make a tish once in a while. I have Hasidim. I don't have to tell you, you know what I'm talking about. But if not for Hasidim, there's no what we call Rabbistever. Rabbistever means Rebbe, the Rebbehood, the Rebbe dynasty. There's no Rabbistever. And the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, she said to Nat Lewin and recorded in the trial that this library belongs to Hasidim, to Chabad, because my father belonged to Chabad. And when we think about it, not only was this a genius answer legally in a trial, but I look at it more philosophically. What she said about what a Rebbe is, and this is relevant to us as we learn Hasidus, right? A Rebbe is not an individual who decided to open up shop. It's totally wrong. A Rebbe is a collective soul, what we call in Hebrew, neshama klalit, neshama klalis. And this collective soul has every collective, right? So he has Yodesin, Velvul, and Hillel, and Avram, myself, and Moshe, and Avi, and everyone, and Yoini, and everyone else. And Klal Yisrael. That's what a collective soul means. So this collective soul is only a collective soul in doing what he needs to do to fulfill God's mission on earth because of Hasidim. It's a fascinating thought. You know, it's a fascinating thought. So this is the second most important teaching that she shared with, this is public. The first thing I told you, we don't have a public record of it, but this we have a public record. So, you know, it can't be denied that she said it. You can interpret it differently, granted. I'm not saying this interpretation that I'm sharing is the only interpretation, but clearly this is public. So this is a little bit about her. Now, Moshe, you wanted to say or ask something. Go ahead.
There are just two things. One is, I want to ask you, Rabbi Dalfin, just to go back to repeat the first point. You said it wasn't on record. What was the first point? Because the
first point was that she told the Rebbe, if you don't take the leadership that the Hasidim want you, my father and grandfather's dynasty will become naught. It'll end and finished, and you can close up shop. And that she said in 1950, and I gave you some background to understand that at that time, that was a very true statement. In other words, today or in 1994, you can argue, no. And the proof is, the Rebbe physically passed away, and there's 5,000 women gathering and doing, and there's Chabad all over the world. How is that possible? The physical Lubavitcher Rebbe is not there. So I'm saying you can argue that way. I don't agree with that argument, but I'm saying you could argue. But in 1950, it was kipshuta. Literally, it was that way. Clear? Moshe, clear? Got lost.
Yeah. The second question is...
Yeah.
The second question I had was, what was it that Hinkind. What's Hinkind?
Dov Heikind. Dov Heikind came to the Rebbe to be Menachem Avol like everyone else, and he said some words. I forget what he said, but he mentioned, I think he said to the Rebbe, your wife was so special. So the Rebbe just, out of the blue, commented to him, yes, people underestimated her.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yonason and then Hillel.
Yeah.
I met my dad when I was in Klein for 15 years, and I never saw the Rebbetzin. The only time I saw the Rebbetzin was when the Rebbe had the heart attack, and it came out. And that was the first time I saw him in 15 years. I mean, you know, it's amazing.
Yeah, and you see, I didn't see her then, and you did. I saw her Lag BaOmer, so probably you weren't around 1980 Lag BaOmer. You're talking about 1977, so I was there 77, but I didn't see her. You were there. Yes, but, again, you were there 15 years and you saw her one time. I was there all my life and I saw her one time. Hillel.
Just wanted to bolster your point about 1950 versus 1994. Most of the Hasiduses had been local in Europe, and they'd all been dislocated. Only a few have survived, really, and consolidated. So there were probably hundreds and hundreds of Hasiduses that disappeared.
100%. My grandfather always showed him, I remember like now, growing up as a boy, in a mamish, he had this little black book that he brought with him, I guess from Poland, and he would open up and he would say, look at this tzaddik. And there was a little description. All of them were gone, killed by the Nazis in Machshemam. All of them. And my grandfather, he didn't know all of them, but he was an Alexander Chassid, so he spoke mostly about Alexander, but I'm seconding what you're saying. Yeah, unfortunately, most were decimated and killed. Yeah.
Alexander kind of got absorbed into another Hasidus. I don't remember.
Ger.
Yeah.
But
absorbed many of the small Hasidus.
I wanna just for the record, during their heyday in Poland, they were rivals. They were both like almost identical in many of their things, but they were rivals, right? Rival in the sense, are you Alexander Chassid or Ger Chassid? But Alexander was really decimated. Ger survived because the Ger Rebbe, the Imre Emes, I think went over to Eretz Yisrael in 1935, so before the war. So he was able to make the transition and build his Hasidus in Eretz Yisrael. But Alexander didn't. So Alexander Rebbe was killed. I mean, only in the last, over here, I think there's a shul in Eretz Yisrael, in Bnei Brak, Yerushalayim, and there's something here in Borough Park, but it's all, relatively speaking, small, Yeah. Velvel, any questions? Reb Velvel, azay still.
Shalom, everybody. My question is whether Rebbetzin Nachamadina, whether she was similar private with regards to visiting Bezras Nashim, Otfilo, and so on and so forth. And second, so Rebbe said that Rebbetzin Mushka was a very private person, but she was a private person the whole time. So when we about time and Paris and Berlin, so it was the same. So she didn't get private just after the seals of the Rebbe, but she was private the whole time.
I hear your point. I'm not sure I agree with that second point. It needs to be looked at because, for example, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested in Leningrad in 1927, she was there and they say swallowed some papers, and then she did some missions for him. But, so we would have to really, do a study compared to her sister. But I would think that Yes, she was more private than her sister. I would agree with that. At least with the sister that remained alive, Hannah, the one that Shana that was killed. Rechman litzlan. I don't know. But to your first point, just briefly, what was the first point again? Quiet.
Who gave him noodles?
Shh. What was the first point?
First part was whether Rebbetzin Medina was.
Oh, so Rebbetzin Medina. First of all, the Frierdiker Rebbe was in America, confined to a wheelchair. Basically, everything was upstairs. The davening and the learning and the farbrengens, and she wasn't in the kitchen. She was right there. She was not as private. Because even after he passed away in 1950, 3 times a year she would make a masiba upstairs, Yutas Kislev, Purim, and Yud Beis Tammuz, and invite the older Hasidim, give tea and cake, and had the elder Hasidim speak a little bit. But she hosted it. So she was much more kind of, took a lead role. Also, on the stationery, right after the previous Rebbe passed away, but I told you this before, the top says Rebbetzin Medina Shnerzin of Lubavitch, and below there's the two son-in-laws. Also, she was blind. Deaf. She was deaf for many years. Many years. So her ability was limited. But I would say that she was more outgoing. Yeah. You have to also understand that she was the daughter of Avram Schneerson of Kishinev, who was not a Rebbe, who had a different, the house was a different kind of house, maybe more sophisticated and all of that. And I would say that she was more outgoing. I would agree with that. Yes, Moshe.
So speaking of that, what about the Rebbetzin Chana, the Rashad's wife? What was her involvement in communal affairs?
Nothing, because Lubavitch didn't accept her husband as the Rebbe. Her husband was the head of the yeshivas. That wasn't her department. She, kind of fought for all those years until it came out. She was the driver behind the whole library case. It wasn't her son Barry. It was her. She was very unhappy for all the years. She was a bright woman. I know that from I know that. She considered herself kind of real Lubavitch. I think in a way she looked at her sister as less Lubavitch as she was. She was with her grandfather. She was older only by 2 years, I think, than her sister. But, her style, she knew about Hasidim. She was, she spoke about Bocharim. She spoke about the Mashpiyim. She spoke about the Rabbanim that came to see her father. So she considered herself, and it's interesting, she married a Gerari, and the Geraris are very sophisticated people. So she was the one who married Gerari, and Rebbetzin Mushka married the Rebbe. The Rebbe was more modest and not, I'm the special person. The Geraris, they are very fine people, but they have a certain ego and elitism. I'm going to use the word elitism. I'm not saying in a terrible way, but they do have an elitism. And I think that she had a certain elitism in her view that she is the real McCoy. Hevra, we had a Farbrengen, Geschmack. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Same time, same channel. Have a great day. Shalom. Bye-bye. May the neshama of Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka ben Reb Yosef Yitzchok have an aliyah. Amen.